It's Mother's Day, and we usually associate that with flowers and candy and remembrances of that kind with cards. But you know, Mother's Day had an origin in matters of social justice. We're going to learn about that today on Austin's Faith Dialogue, and we invite you to be with us.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson in behalf of Austin Area Interreligious Ministries, bidding you welcome to this edition of the show. This being Mother's Day, it's appropriate that we should note the origins of this observance. It was in 1908 that Anna Jarvis, an active Methodist laywoman, initiated the observance, which led within 6 years to a presidential proclamation that on the second Sunday of May would be officially Mother's Day. Jarvis was fond of reciting a litany that she composed about the patriarchy of American calendar. Washington's birthday is for the father of our country. 4th of July, our founding fathers. Thanksgiving honors our pilgrim fathers. Even New Year's Day is for old Father Time. So Anna Jarvis was for equal time as far as mothers were concerned, but it was far more than that prompted her to do her lobbying that was really a continuation of Julia Ward Howe's efforts that were from the 1870s. It was in the aftermath of the Civil War, and it was Howe's intention to try to establish a Woman's Peace Day, because it's so often the women who suffer the consequences and the aftermath of war. Likewise, have feminist leaders carried forward this theme of social justice for women, the observance of Mother's Day. Coretta Scott King led a Mother's Day march in 1968 in support of poor mothers of all races. Dr. Helen Caldicott has led a movement of physicians for social responsibility for the purpose of supporting nuclear disarmament. It's in that setting that on this Mother's Day in Austin, Texas, we are going to have the opportunity to discern how social justice continues to be a theme that is played in practice among folks here. And helping us to discern that is Lydia Hernandez, Executive Director of Manos de Cristo, and Kathy Reed, who is the pastor of the Austin Mennonite Church. We welcome you both.
Thank you.
And as I was explaining this origin of Mother's Day, it naturally to turn to your work in the Manos de Cristo and in the church, how social justice issues with women are forwarded. What in your case, Lydia, do you find this at work with you?
Well, I don't think we have a specific program that says justice for women. But I think as we serve people who are in need, we do encounter the issues and problems that women face in our society. Women come in for food, for clothing. They come into, a lot of times very tentative when they come and they say, we want to study English. And that's when I just want to lean forward and say, yes, absolutely, you want to study, because I think for a large number of the women who come to Manos de Cristo seeking help, they don't have education, they don't have skills, and they a lot of times feel like they don't deserve it, that somebody else should come before they do. Mm-hmm. And so those issues do actually come forward in just conversation with them.
Let's have in our mind the picture of where your ministry is carried on. Where is Manos de Cristo located, and what is your population?
Manos de Cristo is located in East Austin. You can still see the skyline of Austin, so it's that close to the downtown. It's part of what is now called the Austin Downtown Corridor, really. Mm-hmm. But it is in historic East Austin. Originally, that neighborhood was a German-speaking neighborhood.
I see.
And it continues to be a safe haven for new immigrants. And the newest immigrants come from predominantly Mexico and Latin America.
All right.
And so it's a Spanish-speaking neighborhood, even though now it's changing again. But it has been for the longest time, German-speaking first and then Spanish-speaking.
How is it changing now?
Well, it is changing now because a lot of the desirable housing close to downtown is in that area. And there are some beautiful historic homes. The church in which the ministry is based, for example, it's over 100 years old. It's very beautiful. It's got the stamped tin roof and the beautiful windows and all those things that are very pleasing to look at a house or a neighborhood. So,
Getting gentrified in a sense.
yes, thank you.
Okay, so it's just south of Cesar Chavez, and the people that come to you, the women, when they say that they want to learn English, that's a social justice issue from your standpoint.
It's a social justice issue for me because I believe that in order for women to become self-sufficient, and a lot of time what I see are women who come there with children, and they don't really have a really good job, they don't really have a lot of schooling, and they're trying to actually do what's best for their children and for themselves, but they always put others first. And so a lot of times what I see is, a social justice issue, because then there are going to be people who are going to be doing jobs that pay very little money, if, without any security, without any compensation benefits.
I see.
And so that is a
So it all
social
ties
justice
together.
issue. Yes.
Kathy Reed, pastor of the Mennonite Church of Austin, you were nodding very appreciatively from what Lydia was saying. What is it that you resonate to from what she was speaking about?
Well, I thought it's just interesting that Lydia said we don't have a special program for women, and I was thinking of how being a woman pastor, at least in the Mennonite church, still being a woman pastor is unusual and rare, means that you do ministry a little differently probably than your male colleagues do, and that women's justice issues are part of what we do, but I don't think of it as a separate category.
Okay. What are some of the services or ministries
Well,
that
I think
you're
the thing
involved
that probably has shaped the way I do ministry the most is domestic violence issues. And it's not so much that our church does any kind of special programming as much as I made a commitment a long time ago that when we pray the prayers for those who are hurting, those who are hungry and homeless, we would also include prayers for people who have been sexually assaulted and people who have been abused. We talk about child abuse. I try to use examples of those kinds of things in my sermons. And consequently, I get a lot of people who come to talk about that in pastoral care and counseling too.
Okay. We had you on the show earlier about the issue of sexual abuse in the church. And I remember you're mentioning at that time that somehow just to speak about it from the pulpit.
It kind of opens the door for other people to talk about their experiences. And all too often churches probably have not been willing to talk about those issues, and so there hasn't been a place in church to talk about some of those really deep hurts that people have.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I'm wondering is that insofar as it's questions like sexual abuse, we associate that with personal pastoral counseling. It's not organizing women to protest in some way. I mean, we think of social justice as demonstrations, as marches. This is different, what you're involved in.
Right. I think it is different in the sense that it's sort of naming it and talking perhaps spiritually and theologically about the issue, perhaps a way that you can't in other kinds of settings. So it's a different kind of organizing.
Do you do any organizing in your work over at Manos de Cristo? Have you been part of marches in behalf of women's causes?
Yes, I have. But I think in terms of specifically answering the question there for Manos de Cristo, I wish I could say to you that we were organizing people, because I think a lot of people accept marginalized people. They even accept poor people. They even accept poor women. But when poor women become organized, then that's a problem. And I think the power lies in having a unified effort. And I think to the extent that we could unify our efforts with other organizations that are working to support women in just causes for themselves, I think it'd be a great thing.
Problems for whom?
For the status quo, for people who want to see things stay like they have been for a long time. And I think a lot of times, I think in more recent history, I have been concerned because I think in the institutions, I see that, especially the church, there is a backlash against women.
Aha. Do you discern a backlash against women and going on right now?
Well, I mean, it happens. I mean, for me, it happens in real ways. I mean, I've had people in my service get up and leave when it's time for me to preach because they didn't realize when they came to church it was going to be a woman minister.
Uh-huh. Okay, so it's the stereotype that's at work. You know, the Mennonites are known as a denomination, a faith tradition that is into social justice issues. I mean, hasn't there been a pacifist element in your background in that regard?
I mean, Mennonites historically are involved in peace issues, and I think peace issues, like you described in the introduction, are very much kind of issues around women and children. I mean, most recently the Mennonite Church has been heavily involved in working in altering or adjusting or eliminating the sanctions against Iraq because of the way that those sanctions, those economic sanctions, are impacting women and children, in particular in Iraq.
The whole population is suffering, but it bears most heavily. Why do women and children, does it bear more heavily on them?
Well, most of the time because we're on the lower end of the economic scale.
Okay.
I mean, there are more women and children in poverty. So anytime you're talking about issues of poverty, you're going to be talking about women and children.
Is that right?
Yes, I think absolutely. I mean, I haven't lived in Guatemala for 4 years. And even today, I go back to visit Guatemala, and I visit communities that are just widows and children. And they were left there without any education, without any skills, without any support system that was going to promote life. And Christian faith promotes life. And so they're at the bottom there.
I remember Hillary Clinton going to Peking, as probably the best known celebrity to attend that some years ago, in which the whole issue of women's rights around the world was discussed. And that surfaced just how much prejudice and how much poverty that there is. It's not just in our country, but all over.
It's a worldwide problem.
Yeah. Well, in the second half of the show, we'll be moving more from the Austin area to larger significance of Mother's Day as an occasion to think about and act on social justice issues. And you mentioned Guatemala, and I think that we'll come back to perhaps your experience there. I know you've been dealing with a group called Voices of Sophia.
Yes,
That has a women's movement that has that particular interest. We'll touch on that. And then I want to tell you a story when we get back about a Mother of the Year that's very interesting. But meanwhile, folks, don't go away. Stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue, where today we are focusing on the origin of Mother's Day in terms of the social justice emphasis from the time that Anna Jarvis convinced the lawmakers in D.C. to start in 1914, the first Mother's Day on the second Sunday of May. To help us probe that locally and then beyond, we've had Lydia Hernandez, who is the Executive Director of Manos de Cristo, and we've had Kathy Reed, who is the pastor of the Austin Mennonite Church. At the break, ladies, I told you I was going to tell you a story about the mother of some famous Lutheran ministers up in Minnesota. And she was just a person in her own right that was very active over the years, that she got named by a national group Mother of the Year. However, she couldn't accept the reward because she had been arrested for floating out in a dinghy in front of a nuclear submarine in Washington State, in Puget Sound, protesting nuclear war. So somebody else had to accept her award in her place, and she was in jail. Now that's a rather extreme example, but it seems to me that it's to the point that we're saying that to act in behalf of social justice for women is the appropriate thing to do on Mother's Day, as well as to remember our mothers with cards and that kind of thing. You were talking just before the break also, Lydia, about being in Guatemala, and was there anything else you wanted to say that you discovered there that bears on our situation here?
Well, I think one of the most powerful experiences that I had there was to have visited a lot of the communities where there were mainly widows and children and extreme poverty. And then there were demonstrations I had heard on the radio about people wanting to stop the war. And so I hopped on my little Toyota and dashing off to go back to the seminary where I was teaching. And lo and behold, I saw all of these women, and they were waving and waving. The closer I got, I began to realize these were all the widows that I had visited in a large number of those communities. And I think, gosh, they have nothing. And yet they're risking their lives and their children's life. They were carrying their children. Some were toddlers. Some were being on their backs. And I just thought it was such a wonderful, positive action on behalf of life and peace and justice. And I thought, maybe that's something that I should learn from them.
You've brought that back to us here today. We appreciate that. And Kathy, have you ever been in a demonstration? Have you ever been in a march?
Yeah, sure.
Whereabouts? Where have you done that?
I've done all kinds of things because I guess I'm one of those, my kids would call me an old hippie, so
Okay.
they always want to know whether I was really in all the Forrest Gump things they see on TV. You know, I have to tell them, yeah, some of them I was. I mean, what can I say? I think that the whole issue around Mother's Day and social justice is interesting because I think that there is probably in my personal life nothing that has committed me more to peace and justice issues than being a mother, because I thought I was committed before, but when you have children and when you love your children the way I think mothers do love their children, there's nothing that becomes a higher priority than making this world a better place for them to live. And being Mennonite, we're pacifists, and so we don't believe in war. But you get a new perspective on it when you have a son who reaches the age where if there was a draft, he could be drafted, you know, or called for military service. And it makes you really stop and think about what kind of world you want your children to live in. And I think undergirds what we do.
So having children yourself made a difference in terms of how committed you were to making changes. I had asked Lydia earlier about her location. I know that you all have a new location. And where is that, and how does that play into social justice from where you're situated now?
Well, I think it plays into social justice. I mean, we very deliberately wanted to find a neighborhood in Austin where it was diverse incomes and diverse racial groups. And so we looked specifically in East Austin and purchased a former Presbyterian church building in Northeast Austin. And just are really enjoying the neighborhood and the diversity that we find in that neighborhood.
What is the neighborhood?
We're in Windsor Park,
Okay,
north of the old airport.
okay, okay. And that brings you into contact with some needs that you wouldn't find maybe
gives us
elsewhere
a
in
lot
the
of
city.
opportunities for mission and outreach, and gives us a wonderful neighborhood to love and care for, and be part of.
Because I live there.
You live there? Oh,
Not formally, sure.
okay. Well, that's good. We can go visit sometime.
That's right.
Just because you're a Presbyterian doesn't mean you can't visit a Mennonite church.
That's right.
Speaking of Presbyterians, there was this Sophia conference that was a source of some controversy not too long ago. out of which Voices of Sophia has continued to. What is that for the general public to know, how that is a feminist movement?
Well, Voices of Sophia actually began after the Reimagining Conference that was held that caused a lot of controversy in the church. At the base of what is so wonderful about Voices of Sophia is that you see a lot of young women committed to the church, becoming a transforming agent in society for justice, for the betterment of women and children, and for anyone who is marginalized.
Well, now, where does the term come from? Sophia is...
It's wisdom. It is probably theologians can espouse a lot of it, or biblical scholars, because it is definitely referred to in the Bible quite often. And it refers to first God is wisdom, and then Jesus being committed to wisdom, which would be God, and then others committed to Jesus because Jesus is also wisdom, but also having a feminine side.
Well, now the Greek word, Hebrew word for wisdom, has feminine quality to it, does it not?
Yes.
So Sophia is a way of saying here is the feminine side of God.
Exactly. And trying to recover that as which is what I really affirm in what we heard earlier, and that is the description of a Mennonite church, which I really liked, was when she was talking about, well, there is not one particular thing. It is the liturgy, it is in my preaching, and I make a difference. And I think having those feminine model in her person and the images in her preaching and is very important for women to stay in the church.
Although there are still some people that get up and walk out when you get up to preach, is that right? You were saying that it's not altogether come to the place where people can accept a woman in the pulpit as what they conceive to be the fitting role. I mean, this raises other kinds of questions about equal opportunity employment, but we'll hold that for another show. I'd like to come back, though, to one other thing, Lydia, that you said that you have these younger women who are involved in various kinds of social justice issues in the Voices of Sophia. What are some examples of that?
I think some of the women that were there, for example, are people who are working on the border, which was amazing to me. They are actually the people who are taking water, blankets, trying to stop abuse of the immigrants who are walking across the border through the desert and having a hardship. And a lot of them are women and children. And so these young women are committed to helping people. If they're going to migrate for need of employment, that they will do it under safe conditions. And so I got to visit with some of the women, young women, actually quite young women who are from the United States. Some of them very blonde, some of them very dark-headed, but all committed to making a safe place on the border.
Marching across the desert?
Yeah, working, setting up camps where they would have water and blankets and food.
These are people migrating to the States?
These are people migrating to the States, whether from Mexico or from Central America. And so then the people on this side of the border meeting there and providing shelter and food and clothing for them.
Okay. Are you familiar with that that aspect of ministry on the border? I know this is something that the Presbyterians have had quite a bit to do with. Does that extend to you?
Well, one of the things that surprises people about the Mennonite churches in Texas, there are more Hispanic Mennonites than there are Anglo-Mennonites. We have a large number of churches along the border in particular, and